The sun was burning red in the sky, spreading its heat across the broken land. Among the ruins of a destroyed village, a woman lay on the ground. Her skin was pale, her body thin, and her breath weak. She was an alien, not human, with silver lines marking her face and long dark hair covered in dust. Her dress was torn, and flies circled her like shadows waiting for death. She had once been a wife, a mother, and a farmer's daughter. Now she was only a widow, left alone after the war came to her people. Her husband had been killed on the battlefield. Her neighbors had run away to the mountains. But she had no strength to follow. Hunger had eaten her from the inside. She had not tasted food in many days, only drinking dirty water from broken jars. The woman closed her eyes, ready for the end. She whispered in her own language, calling to her husband in the afterlife. Tears mixed with the dust on her face. Insects crawled near her arms, and still she did not move. Her body was giving up, her soul ready to leave. Then a shadow moved across her, blocking the burning sun. At first she thought it was death coming to take her, but when she opened her eyes, she saw boots, worn and covered in dirt. Slowly, her eyes moved upward, and she saw him, a human. He stood tall above her, his face tired and scarred, his uniform torn. A rifle was hanging from his shoulder, and his eyes were dark with pain. He was also weak, his lips dry, his steps slow. But unlike her, he carried something on his belt, a small pack, a food pack, the last one he had. The alien woman's eyes widened, hunger screaming inside her empty stomach, but fear also grew in her chest. She knew humans. She had heard the stories. Humans were killers, destroyers, soldiers who burned villages and left the weak behind. Maybe he had come to finish what others had started. Maybe he would kill her just to silence her breathing. The human knelt down beside her. His shadow cooled her face, his breath heavy and slow. For a long moment, he said nothing, only staring at her with eyes that seemed full of questions. The woman tried to move, but her arms fell back weakly. Her lips trembled as she whispered in her broken voice, "End it, please." The human's eyes narrowed. He could understand her meaning even if he did not know her words. She was asking for death, but inside his chest, his heart pulled in another direction. He saw not an enemy, not a stranger, but a living being on the edge of life. He thought of his own wife far away on earth. He thought of the child he had never seen grow up. And suddenly, the choice before him felt heavier than the weight of his rifle. The food pack on his belt was his last. Without it, he might not survive the next march. But as he looked at the alien woman, lying in the dirt with flies swarming her face, he knew the truth. If he ate, one life would continue for a while. If he gave it to her, maybe two lives would continue together. The human took the pack in his hand. The alien woman's eyes followed the movement with fear and hope. Her breath caught as she waited for what he would do. Would he keep it for himself, or would he give away the last chance he had? The human slowly opened the pack and held it out to her. The smell of food drifted into the air, simple and dry, but more precious than gold. The alien woman gasped, her hands shaking as she tried to reach, but she was too weak. Her fingers trembling in the dust, the human sighed, breaking the food into pieces and lifting it to her lips. She tasted the first bite, and tears spilled down her face. The flavor was plain, but to her it was life itself. The human watched as she ate, his own stomach twisting with hunger. But he did not take it back. He let her finish, slowly. Every crumb, every piece. Her breathing grew steadier, her skin less pale, her eyes brighter. For the first time in many days, she felt alive. Again, when she finished, she whispered in her soft alien tongue, her voice weak but filled with meaning. "Life, bringer." The human's chest tightened. He had saved her, but in truth, something inside him felt saved too. He looked at her lying in the ruins. No longer just a dying stranger, but someone connected to him through survival. And in that moment, one thought burned in his mind like fire. He could not leave her here. Not now, not after this. Far away, the sound of machines and war echoed in the distance. Danger was near, and the ruins were not safe. But the human knew one thing clearly. His journey was no longer alone. The human sat beside the alien woman. His breath slow and heavy. He had given her his last food. And now, his stomach burned with emptiness. His throat was dry, his body weak. But still, he stayed close. The woman looked at him with tired eyes, her lips trembling, her hands shaking. She had been sure he would leave her, or even kill her. Instead, he had given away the only thing that could have saved his own life. The sun began to set, throwing long red shadows over the broken land. The ruins around them whispered with the memory of war. Burnt homes, broken walls, and blood-stained ground told the story of what had happened here. The human looked at those ruins and felt the weight of silence pressing on his chest. He had seen too many places like this, too many families gone, too many lives wasted. The alien woman coughed weakly, the sound sharp in the quiet air. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if to hold her life inside. Then she looked at him and whispered something in her own tongue. Her voice was faint but filled with feeling. The human could not understand her words. But he understood her eyes. They were saying, "Thank you." And they were asking for something more. Not food, not water, but a reason to live. The human turned away, staring at the dark sky inside his mind. A battle was growing. He remembered the faces of his commanders, the rules of war, the orders drilled into him. Humans and aliens were not meant to trust each other. They were enemies, and enemies were never meant to be saved. But he remembered also the face of his wife back on Earth. He remembered the letter she had sent before he left. "You are more than a soldier." She had written, "You are a man who carries hope." Those words echoed now in his chest. And he looked again at the alien woman, lying broken and weak. Her body marked by flies and dust, but her spirit still holding on. She should have been nothing to him, just another figure left behind by war. But she was not nothing. She was someone who needed him. The human reached into his pocket. Pulling out a small flask, it held only a few drops of water, the last of his supply. He stared at it for a long time, his lips dry, his throat begging for relief. Then he looked at her again, and without speaking, he placed the flask to her mouth. The woman's eyes widened, her breath catching. She drank slowly, every drop precious. When it was empty, she closed her eyes and let out a weak sigh. The human turned his head away, hiding the hunger and thirst burning inside him. Night came, cold and quiet. The stars spread across the sky. And the broken land grew still. The human pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders. He glanced at the woman, who shivered as the night air cut through her thin clothes. He thought of leaving, walking away into the dark. It would be easier, faster, safer. But as he looked at her fragile body, lying helpless, he knew he could not. He had already made his choice. His path was now tied to hers. He took off his cloak and covered her with it. She opened her eyes slightly, surprised. Her lips moved, forming words he could not understand. But her expression said enough. She was no longer afraid of him. She trusted him, even if only a little. The human sat back, his body cold without the cloak. He listened to the distant hum of machines in the night, enemy drones, searching the ruins. If they found him here, it would be the end. But still he stayed. Still he watched over her. Still he protected her. As the hours passed, his thoughts grew heavy. He wondered what his fellow soldiers would say if they saw him now. A human soldier giving food, water, and warmth to an alien widow. They would call him a traitor, weak, foolish. But deep inside, he felt something stronger than duty. He felt human. And being human meant he could not let her die. The alien woman stirred in her sleep, whispering in her language. Her hand reached out blindly and touched his arm. Even in dreams, she was holding on to him. The human closed his eyes, letting the moments sink into his heart. He knew tomorrow would be harder. There would be no food, no water, and danger everywhere. But he also knew something had changed inside him. He had chosen her life over his comfort, and that choice was not just survival. It was the beginning of something he did not yet understand. Far away, the sound of metal echoed in the night. The war was still moving, still searching, still killing. But here, in this small, broken ruin, one human and one alien had formed a fragile thread of hope. And as the human closed his eyes against the cold wind, one thought burned in his chest. If he could protect her through the night, maybe together they could find a way to live another day. The first light of morning touched the ruins, soft and golden. The human opened his eyes after a night of broken sleep. His body ached from the cold. His lips were cracked from thirst. But he was alive. He turned his head and looked at the alien woman. Still wrapped in his cloak, her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, no longer weak and fading like before. For the first time since he had found her, she looked less like a shadow of death and more like a living being. She stirred slowly, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze found him, and for a long moment she only stared. Her eyes, once dull and lifeless, now carried a faint light. It was not strength. Not yet, but it was something. The human felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. He had seen countless bodies fall in this war, but now he was seeing life return. The alien woman tried to sit up, her arms trembling with effort. He quickly leaned forward, steadying her. Her thin fingers brushed against his hand, rough with scars and dirt. She hesitated, then let him support her. It was the first time she had allowed him to touch her without fear. In her eyes, there was still caution, but also gratitude. She whispered in her own tongue, soft and broken. The human could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. It was thanks. It was hope. It was a fragile trust growing between them. He nodded, not needing translation. Sometimes words were less important than the look in someone's eyes. The woman looked around the ruins, the empty homes, and burned stone. She pressed her lips together, her eyes wet with memory. The human knew she was remembering what she had lost: her family, her husband, her people. Her sorrow was heavy, but in her gaze toward him there was also something new, a small spark of will, a reason not to give up. The human stood and scanned the horizon. The world beyond the ruins was dry, empty, and dangerous. He knew enemy drones still hunted, and scavengers prowled at night. Staying here meant death. Sooner or later, he looked back at her, wondering if she could walk. Her body was weak, her legs thin as sticks, but her spirit was no longer ready to die. He motioned with his hands. Pointing away from the ruins, she understood. Even without his words, her eyes widened with fear. But then she nodded slowly. With his help, she rose to her feet. Leaning heavily on his arm, her steps were shaky, each one a battle. But every step carried the strength of survival. They moved together through the broken land, the human guiding her. Pausing often when she faltered, the morning air was cool, but the sun was rising fast. He knew they had to find water, food, and shelter before night came again. He kept his eyes sharp, scanning for danger, but in his mind, his thoughts kept circling back to her. Why had he done it? He wondered. Why had he given his last meal to her? Why had he stayed through the night? He told himself it was mercy, a soldier's kindness. But deep inside, he knew it was more. Something in her eyes, even when clouded by death, had reminded him of home, of humanity itself, even though she was not human. At one point she stumbled, nearly falling. He caught her quickly, pulling her close to steady her. her face turned toward him, close enough that he could see every line. Every scar of hunger and pain. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, her lips trembled. And then she whispered a single word: life. The human froze, his chest tightening. She had spoken in his language, broken and unsure, but clear enough. It was not an accident. It was a choice. She had taken one of his words and made it her own. And in that moment, he felt the bond between them grow stronger than before. The days stretched on, their journey slow and painful. They rested under the shade of a half-broken wall. The woman leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Her breathing was steady, her eyes closed. The human looked at her and realized something he had not wanted to admit. He no longer saw her as just an alien widow. He saw her as a life worth protecting. A soul worth fighting for. But danger was never far. The faint hum of a drone echoed in the distance, growing louder. The human's body tensed. His hand reaching for his weapon, he pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The alien woman froze. Fear flashing in her eyes. Together they crouched low, hidden by the broken wall. The drone passed overhead, its shadow sliding across the ground. For a long, breathless moment, it hovered, then drifted away. The human let out a slow sigh. They were safe. But only for now. When the silence returned, the woman looked at him again. Her eyes still carried fear, but behind it was the same spark he had seen that morning. It was the spark of someone who wanted to live. The human nodded, as if to promise he would keep her alive. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his arm, not with weakness this time, but with intent. It was her way of saying she trusted him. It was her way of saying he had given her life again. As the sun sank lower and the shadows stretched long, the human felt the weight of tomorrow pressing close. They had no food, little hope, and enemies hunting everywhere. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw light where before there had only been death. And for the first time since the war began, he felt something stronger than fear. He felt purpose. The road ahead was nothing but dust and broken stone. The human led carefully, one step at a time. His hand steadying the alien woman. Her legs shook with every movement, but she did not fall. She leaned against him, her body light as if the wind could carry her away. Together, they moved through the dead land. Silent, except for their uneven breaths. The sun rose higher, burning on their backs. The human kept his eyes sharp, scanning the horizon for movement. The world was not safe, not for him, not for her. Enemy drones searched the skies. Scavengers lurked in the ruins. Every shadow could hide a trap. Every sound could be death, but the human pressed forward. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. The alien woman followed, her trust fragile but growing. She looked at him often, her eyes watching his face. It was as if she was searching for answers she could not ask. By midday, they reached a ridge of black stone. The human guided her to sit in the shade. She sank to the ground, gasping for air. Her hands trembled as she touched the earth. He gave her a moment to rest, though his own body screamed for water. He crouched beside her, pointing to the horizon. Far away, mountains rose like teeth against the sky. If they could reach the valleys below them, there might be water, maybe shelter. The distance was long, the journey hard, but it was hope. The woman followed his hand, her lips parting as if she understood. Her eyes narrowed with determination. Weak yet unbroken, the human pulled a broken piece of metal from his pack. Using the dirt, he drew simple marks, a line for their path, an arrow for the mountains. The woman leaned close, watching, though she could not understand his words. She understood the picture. Her hand reached out, tracing the line with her finger. Then she nodded slowly. For the first time, they shared a plan. They set out again. Walking along the ridges and broken ground, the alien woman stumbled often. But each time the human caught her, his arms were strong, though his body grew weaker with every step. She looked at him with eyes full of silent questions. Why would he carry her? Why would he risk so much for her? The human did not speak. But his actions were the answer. As the day stretched on, they came upon a ruin, half buried in the sand. The human motioned for silence. His rifle ready, he entered first. Checking the shadows, inside the ruin were old walls, broken beams, and silence thick with dust. It was empty, at least for now. He waved her inside. Letting her rest on a stone bench for the first time since morning, they had a place to breathe. The human searched the ruin quickly, finding scraps of burned cloth. No food, no water, but at least a roof above their heads. He returned to her side, his eyes scanning her face. Her cheeks were still pale, but her breathing was calmer now. She met his gaze and whispered a sound, soft but full of meaning. "Safe," she said. The word broken, but real. The human's chest tightened. She had learned another of his words, and she had used it for him. They stayed there until the sun began to fall. The ruin grew colder as night crept closer. The human gathered the scraps of cloth and built a small fire. The flames flickered weakly. Pushing back the dark, the woman sat close to the fire. Her hands held out for warmth. Her eyes glowed in the light, silver lines on her skin shining softly. The human watched her quietly, thinking she looked less like a stranger and more like someone he knew. But the silence broke when a sharp sound echoed outside. The human froze, his hand reaching for his weapon. The woman's eyes widened, fear rushing back into her face. Another sound followed. The crunch of footsteps on stone. Not drones, not machines, but scavengers. The human motioned for her to stay still. He moved to the edge of the ruin, his rifle ready. Shadows moved outside. Voices low and rough, hunters searching for anything alive. The human's breath slowed, his finger tight on the trigger. But he knew if he fired, more would come. Silence was their only weapon. The woman clutched the cloak around her, her body shaking. Her eyes never left the human as he waited at the wall. The scavengers passed, their footsteps fading into the night. The human let out a breath he had been holding. They were safe. For now, he returned to her side, and she reached out, touching his arm. Her fingers were still shaking, but her eyes held something stronger. She trusted him more than before. The night grew long, and the two of them sat beside the weak fire. Neither spoke. But the silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with survival, with unspoken promises. The human looked at her and saw not weakness, but courage. The woman looked at him and saw not an enemy, but a protector. Together, they faced the darkness. Two souls tied by the same struggle. When the fire burned low, the human whispered to himself, "We will make it." He was not sure if she understood, but she looked at him, and in her eyes was the same thought. They would make it, not alone, but together. The fire had burned out by morning, leaving only ash and smoke. The human rose slowly, his body stiff from the cold night. He checked his weapon, then scanned the broken ruin around them. The world outside was quiet, but quiet in war never meant safe. He turned back and saw the alien woman still sitting on the stone bench, wrapped in his cloak. Her eyes were open, watching him, calm but filled with unspoken questions. She had survived another night, and that alone was a miracle. The human knelt beside her, studying her face in the weak light, her cheeks still hollow, her lips still cracked. But her eyes carried a new spark. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. He realized then that he no longer saw her as just a burden. She was becoming something more, someone who gave his steps meaning. She whispered something in her language. The words soft as falling dust, he could not understand. But her tone was heavy, almost sorrowful. She touched her chest with her hand, then pointed to the horizon. Her eyes grew wet, and her lips trembled as she whispered again. The human leaned closer, listening. Then she spoke one word in broken. Human tongue, husband. The word struck him like a blade. Her husband was gone, taken by the war. That was why she had been left here, abandoned, starving. Waiting for death, she had no family left, no one to call her own. The human lowered his eyes, the pain in her voice echoing with his own memories. He thought of his wife far away. His child he had never held. His own family was gone from him too, not by death, but by distance and war. For a moment, he felt the same emptiness she carried. Two souls broken by the same cruel hand. The alien woman reached out, her fingers brushing his arm gently. She did not speak, but her touch carried meaning. She understood he carried loss as well. She was not alone in her grief, and neither was he. The human placed his hand over hers, rough skin against fragile fingers. For a heartbeat, they simply sat like that, sharing silence that felt like family, but the world outside gave them no time for peace. A sound drifted through the ruin, the hum of engines in the distance. The human tensed, his hand gripping his weapon. He moved to the wall and looked out carefully. Far across the broken land, machines moved. Heavy and slow, enemy patrols sweeping through the ruins. Hunting for survivors, the human cursed under his breath. They were getting closer. He returned to her quickly, motioning with his hands. They had to leave now. The alien woman's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded. With his help, she rose to her feet, her legs still weak, but her spirit stronger than the day before. Together, they slipped out of the ruin, moving quietly among the shadows. The human led the way through broken alleys and crumbled walls. Every sound of boots and machines pushed his heart faster. He guided her with patience, his body shielding hers when she stumbled. He caught her. When she froze, he pulled her forward. The ruins were no longer just broken stone. They were a maze of survival, and in that maze, they were bound together like family. They found shelter in another shattered building, this one filled with old pottery and broken furniture. The human lowered her onto a wooden beam, then checked the corners quickly, empty. Safe for the moment, he crouched down, facing her. Her face was pale, but her eyes looked at him with something new. She whispered a word in her language. "Oh." Then tried again in his family, she said slowly, her voice trembling. The human froze, the words striking deep inside him. She had called him family, not soldier, not enemy, not stranger, but family. For a moment, he could not breathe. He had lost his own family to war, left them behind on a world far away. But here, in this broken place, an alien widow had given him the word again. It was not blood, not marriage, not home, but it was a bond, a fragile bond born in hunger, loss, and survival. He felt tears sting his eyes, but he quickly turned his head. A soldier's tears had no place in war. The woman reached forward again, pressing her hand lightly to his chest. Her lips moved as she whispered the word once more. Family. This time, the human did not turn away. He placed his own hand over hers, nodding slowly. "Yes," he whispered, his voice low but firm. The woman's eyes softened, her lips curving in the faintest smile. In the ruins of war, a new family had been born. But the danger was not gone. Outside, the hum of engines grew louder, closer. The human's heart hardened, his grip tightening on his rifle. He looked at her, fragile yet strong, and he knew he would not let anyone take her. Not enemies, not scavengers, not even death itself. She was family now, and family was worth fighting. For the alien woman met his gaze, her eyes glowing with trust. She was no longer the dying shadow he had found, covered in flies. She was alive because of him, and he was alive because of her. Together, they were no longer alone. Together, they had found family in the ruins. The ruins shook with the echo of heavy engines. Dust drifted from the cracked walls as machines moved closer. The human pressed his back against the stone, his rifle tight in his grip, beside him. The alien woman clutched his cloak, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered something in her tongue, her voice trembling like dry leaves in the wind. He could not understand her words, but he understood her fear. He raised a hand, motioning for silence. The patrol was near, too near. Through a hole in the wall, he saw armored figures moving between the ruins. Their helmets glowed faintly, their weapons raised and ready. If they found him and the woman, there would be no mercy. The human's chest tightened, his mind racing. He turned to her, his voice low and firm. "You stay here," he whispered, pointing to the corner. She shook her head wildly, clutching at his sleeve. Her lips formed a single word she had learned from him. Family. The human swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew she was begging him not to leave her. But he had no choice. To protect her, he had to risk himself. He pulled her close for one brief moment, his hand on her shoulder. Then he pushed her gently into the darkest corner of the ruin. Her body curled small, hidden in shadow. Her silver-marked face shone with tears as she looked at him. He nodded once, his eyes promising what words could not. He would not let harm touch her. The human slipped out through a gap in the wall, moving low and silent. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The patrol was only meters away now, their voices cold and metallic. He aimed his rifle, his heart steady even as fear pressed close. He fired once, the shot sharp and bright in the night. One enemy fell, crashing into the dust. The others shouted, their weapons turning. The human moved fast, drawing their fire away from the ruin. Every shot they fired was one less chance of them finding her. But he was only one man. Bullets scraped the stones around him, sparks flashing. A sharp pain tore across his arm as one shot struck. Flesh, he stumbled, blood dripping down his sleeve, but he did not stop. He forced himself forward, his only thought to lead them away. If he fell, she must live behind him. The alien woman heard the shots. Her heart pounded as each echo filled the ruin. She pressed her hands over her ears, whispering his word again and again. Family, family. Family. Tears streaked her face as she waited, helpless in the dark. But when the shooting grew louder, something inside her broke free. She could not just sit and watch him die. Gathering her last strength, she crawled from the shadows. Her body weak, her steps shaking, but her spirit fierce. She found a broken piece of metal, sharp like a blade, with trembling hands. She gripped it tightly. Her eyes burned with fear and courage. For the first time, she chose to fight. The human fell to one knee behind a crumbled wall. His chest heaved, blood soaking his sleeve. The patrol closed in, their shadows long and dark. He raised his rifle again, ready to take as many as he could. Then, from behind the patrol, a cry echoed, a voice, raw and wild. The alien woman. She struck one soldier from behind with the metal shard. Her weak arms fueled by desperation, the soldier staggered, falling with a heavy crash. The others turned in shock, their formation breaking. The human saw his chance. He rose again, ignoring the pain, and fired. One by one, the patrol fell, dust rising with each collapse. When silence returned, the human dropped his rifle, his strength nearly gone. The alien woman stumbled toward him, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with fear and relief. She fell beside him, pressing her hands to his bleeding arm. Her lips trembled as she whispered again. Family. Her voice cracked, but her eyes shone with fierce fire. She had not let him fight alone. The human looked at her, his vision blurred with pain. He saw her weak body trembling, but her spirit unbroken. She had chosen to stand with him, to fight for him. He felt something deeper than trust form between them. This was not just survival anymore. This was sacrifice. This was loyalty. This was bond. He reached up with his good hand, touching her face gently. Her skin was cold, but alive. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice rough. She shook her head, tears falling. "No," she whispered in broken human tongue. "Together." The human let out a weak laugh, even as pain pulled at his chest. She was right, not one saving the other, but both saving each other. That was trust. That was what made them more than strangers, more than enemies. They were family. Born not of blood, but of sacrifice. As the night closed around them, the ruins fell quiet again. The human leaned back, his body heavy, his arm bleeding. The alien woman pressed close, her hands holding his. Neither spoke more words, but their silence was strong. They had faced death together, and both were still alive. That was enough. For now, the ruins were silent again. But silence no longer meant peace. The human sat against the wall, his arm wrapped in cloth, torn from his own. Uniform blood still seeped slowly, his body weak, but his spirit strong. Beside him, the alien woman stayed close, her small hands gripping his. Her eyes never left his face. Watching him breathe, watching him live. They had survived the night, but survival was not enough. The human knew they could not remain here. More patrols would come, more scavengers would search. If they stayed, death would return. The only hope lay in the mountains ahead, somewhere beyond the ridges. Maybe there was shelter, maybe even allies. It was a distant dream, but it was the only path forward. The alien woman looked toward the horizon, her eyes sharp with new strength. She no longer looked like the dying shadow he had found among flies and dust. She looked like someone who wanted to fight for life. Her thin body was still weak, but her spirit had become iron. The human saw it in her gaze, and he knew she would not let go of him. Not now, not ever. With effort, he pushed himself to his feet. The pain burned through his arm, but he ignored it. He reached down and helped her rise. She leaned against him, steady but not helpless. Together, they stepped out of the ruin, leaving. Behind the ashes of the battle, the morning sun rose over the broken land. Painting it gold and red, a new day had come, and with it, a chance. The journey was slow, each step heavy with exhaustion. But every step was also a promise. They passed broken walls, shattered machines, the skeletons of a world torn by war. The human kept his rifle ready, his eyes sharp. The woman walked close, her hand sometimes brushing his. It was not fear anymore. It was connection. She stayed near because she wanted to, because she trusted him. Hours passed, and the land grew harsher. The sun burned high. The ground cracked beneath their feet. The human's throat was dry, but he said nothing. He could not show weakness. Not when she looked at him with such faith at last, as the day began to fade. They saw it, a stream of water cutting through the rocks, sparkling in the light. The woman gasped. Her eyes wide, she rushed forward, falling to her knees at the edge. The human followed, lowering himself slowly. They drank together, the cold water washing away dust and despair. It was not only water, it was life. It was proof that hope was real. That night, they built a small fire beside the stream. The human used broken branches. The woman gathered stones. Side by side, they worked, their movements clumsy but united. When the fire lit, they sat close, the warmth soft on their faces. The woman turned to him, her lips moving carefully. She whispered another word in broken human tongue. Home. The human's breath caught, his chest tightening. Home. The word struck deep. He thought of Earth, of his wife, of the child he had never held. He thought of the house he had left, behind the life he had lost to war. But as he looked at her, sitting beside him with silver lines glowing in the firelight, he realized something new. Home was not only a place, not only walls and doors. Home could be a person, and in her eyes, he saw home. The woman leaned against his shoulder, her body fragile but warm, her voice soft as she repeated the word, home. The human closed his eyes, letting the moment sink into him. He knew their road was not over. Danger was still near, but he also knew they had already built something stronger than war. They had built trust, family, and hope. The night grew quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. The stars spread above them, endless and bright. The human looked at the sky and whispered to himself, "We will live." The woman heard him. And though she did not understand every word, she nodded. Her hand found his, holding tight. For the first time since he had landed on this broken world, he felt peace. Days turned into a rhythm. Walking by day, resting by night, the human's wound healed slowly, thanks to her care. The alien woman grew stronger, her steps steadier, her eyes brighter. Together, they shared what little they found: water, shelter, strength, the human taught. Her more words, simple ones, she learned quickly, her voice carrying his language with pride. Each word was a bridge between them, each word a thread pulling their worlds closer. One evening, as they sat by a new fire in the shadow of the mountains, she spoke softly, her voice careful, not alone. The human turned to her, surprised by her choice of words. Her eyes shone in the firelight, steady and sure. She was right. Neither of them was alone anymore. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and full of mystery. But instead of fear, the human felt strength with her beside him. There was nothing he would not face, and with him beside her, she would never be abandoned again. Together they had survived hunger, death, and war. Together they had become family, and together they would step into a new beginning, not as soldier and widow, not as human and alien, but as two souls who had chosen life, two souls who had chosen each other.